That single truth disrupts every game he thought he was playing. Because when a woman lets go, not out of spite, but out of self-respect, she forces a shift inside him that no argument, no begging, no warnings could ever trigger. Letting go is not abandonment. It is the return to dignity. It is reclaiming the ground you stood on before you started bending to fit the shape of someone who was too distracted to notice your worth. And this move, this decision, carries a psychological weight that men are simply not prepared for. Men fall harder for the woman who lets them go because detachment introduces a reality they have been running from, the possibility of losing something irreplaceable. While you were available, they took time for granted. They assumed your loyalty was permanent, your love was unconditional, and your presence was guaranteed. But the moment you step back, the world they built on assumptions collapses. Suddenly, he is confronted with the stark truth that your attention was never owed to him, that your consistency was a privilege, and your softness was a gift he mishandled. That realization doesn't just sting, it transforms him. Letting go becomes the ultimate test, not for him, but for you. Because anyone can cling, anyone can chase, anyone can plead to be seen, but it takes a woman of depth and strength to say, if you cannot meet me where I am, then I will continue without you. That level of self-respect is magnetic. It forces him to reevaluate everything he thought he understood about you. He no longer sees you as predictable. He sees mystery where there was routine. He sees courage where he expected tolerance. He sees standards where he assumed dependency. And in that shift, desire sharpens. When you let him go, you are not rejecting him. You are removing yourself from a dynamic that diminishes you. You are choosing clarity over confusion. You are choosing peace over emotional chaos. You are choosing growth over stagnation. And men fall hardest for the woman who chooses herself because she shows him the one thing he cannot manufacture value, grounded in independence. There is nothing more attractive than a woman who doesn't need him to feel whole. Her lack of need makes him feel the weight of his wants. The paradox is powerful. The moment you stop fighting for him, he begins fighting for you. Not because your absence manipulates him, but because your presence was never appreciated properly until it was no longer easy to access. Human psychology is simple: scarcity amplifies meaning. What is always available is rarely valued. What suddenly becomes unavailable becomes unforgettable. And when you walk away, you become a memory he can't escape. Not because you created drama, but because you demonstrated composure. Emotional composure is rare. Most people react with noise, anger, tears, accusations, desperation. But when you let go with silence and conviction, you rise above the emotional level that fueled the dynamic. You send a message without speaking: I will not fight for a place in the life of someone who does not choose me. That line alone creates disruption in his mind. It makes him question his choices, his priorities, and his assumptions. It forces him to confront his own emotional laziness. Letting go is not the end. It is a filter. It separates who wanted you from who only enjoyed your presence. It reveals who sees your worth from who only used your energy. A man who cares will step forward. A man who doesn't will fall away. And your value remains intact either way. That is why men fall harder, because you refuse to collapse just because they failed to show up. Your emotional independence becomes the standard he suddenly realizes he cannot find anywhere else. There is a quiet power in the woman who walks away with grace. She is not punishing, she is not running, she is simply elevating. And elevation creates distance that only the bold can bridge. When he decides to return, he is no longer approaching the same woman. You evolved, you grew, you understood that letting him go was not an act of loss, it was an act of alignment. And the version of you born from letting go is the one he falls hardest for. Not because you want him back, but because you became someone he can no longer ignore. A man falls hardest for the woman who lets him go because she teaches him the most profound lesson without speaking. Love is not possession. It is choice, commitment, and consistency. And if he cannot offer that, she will not stay. That level of certainty, that refusal to be reduced, is what makes her unforgettable. Because the truth is simple. When a woman knows her worth, she becomes the standard he measures every other woman against. And no comparison can compete with the strength of someone who walked away, not to hurt him, but to honor herself. This is not just a statement, it is a psychological disruption. Because when you step back from a man who relied on your presence, your patience, and your emotional availability, you create a silence that exposes everything he tried to overlook. While you were there, he could hide in comfort. He could distract himself with ego, routine, or entitlement. He could pretend that your efforts were guaranteed, that your loyalty was permanent, and that your love would tolerate his inconsistency. But the moment you let him go, not with anger, not with emotional chaos, but with calm conviction, everything he ignored becomes unavoidable. You see, people avoid truth when they believe someone else will carry the emotional weight for them. As long as you were present, he could avoid self-reflection. He didn't have to examine his behavior, his decisions, or his effort. He didn't have to face the reality that he contributed to the distance forming between you. Your availability acted as a cushion. It softened the impact of his choices. But when you release him, the emotional buffer disappears. Suddenly, the consequences land directly on him. Now he has to sit alone with the emptiness he created. Now he has to face himself. Letting a man go is not punishment, it is clarity. It is the moment when your actions match your worth. When you decide that you will no longer negotiate your standards just to keep someone comfortable. When you stop softening your boundaries so he can continue his convenience. This shift forces a man into a kind of internal reckoning. Because the absence of your energy becomes louder than your words ever were. When you let him go, you remove the illusion of security. He no longer has access to the emotional home he assumed would always be open to him. Now he must face the truth that he was careless with something rare. Your consistency wasn't ordinary. Your patience wasn't supposed to be exploited. Your presence wasn't meant to be taken as default. And losing it opens a space where his denial collapses. He realizes that you are not asking for too much. You are asking for what any man with intention would willingly offer. A man often does not understand your value when he is surrounded by it. Familiarity blinds him. Comfort dulls urgency. He assumes you will always stay because you always stayed before. But letting him go transforms you from an option into a loss. A loss he cannot reverse instantly. A loss that forces him to see the truth he refused to acknowledge, that he was not showing up the way you deserved, and that you finally noticed. Your absence becomes a mirror. It reflects his effort, his priorities, and his emotional maturity. It exposes whether he truly cared or merely enjoyed the benefits of your presence. And that truth is uncomfortable, because deep down, he expected more time. He counted on your forgiveness. He assumed your heart would remain open even when his actions didn't match his words. But time ran out. Your silence replaced your explanations. Your distance replaced your hope. Your strength replaced your waiting. Letting a man go doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop sacrificing your peace to prove your care. It means you refuse to repeat the same emotional cycles. It means you choose yourself without apology. And that choice is what shakes him. Because the woman he thought would always be there is suddenly the woman he can't reach. He now has to confront the truth that your presence was a privilege, not a promise. And here is the deeper layer. Letting him go forces him to confront the truth about his own behavior, but it also forces him to confront the truth about you. He realizes that your strength was greater than he acknowledged. He realizes you were not dependent, you were loyal. You were not weak, you were patient. You were not clingy, you were invested. And now that you're gone, he finally sees the difference. Your absence creates accountability. It makes him question why he couldn't give what was needed. It makes him reflect on why he didn't step up when he should have. It makes him regret the moments when he minimized your feelings, dismissed your concerns, or assumed he had time, because now time has run out, and the silence is undeniable. Silence is where truth lives. Silence is where reality hits. Letting him go forces him into maturity he avoided. He now has to make a choice, evolve or lose you forever. Not because you demanded it, but because your absence demands honesty. If he truly cares, he will face the discomfort, take responsibility, and change. If he doesn't, he will fade, and that fading will reveal the truth you needed to see all along. Either way, you win. Because letting him go wasn't about losing him, it was about reclaiming yourself. The truth he now confronts is the truth you finally honored. Your value does not decrease because someone failed to recognize it. It becomes more visible when you walk away. A woman who walks away demonstrates a level of self-respect that rewires a man's perception of her value. This is not just a powerful truth, it is a psychological shockwave. Because when a woman chooses to walk away, not in anger, not in chaos, but in calm certainty, she instantly changes the emotional dynamic. She shifts from someone he assumed would always be there to someone he realizes he could genuinely lose. And loss rewires perception faster than anything else. What he overlooked becomes vivid. What he minimized becomes meaningful. What he took for granted becomes rare. A woman who walks away is not abandoning him, she is honoring herself. And that act alone communicates a strength far louder than any argument, any explanation, or any pleading ever could. Walking away is a statement of value. It says, I will not shrink myself to fit into your ambiguity. It says, I choose peace over confusion. It says, my worth is not up for negotiation. That level of self-respect is not common, and men feel the impact of it instantly. When you leave a dynamic that demeans you, you show him something he never expected. You are not dependent on him for emotional stability. Self-respect is magnetic because it communicates that you are your own anchor. You are not waiting for someone else to validate you. You are not relying on someone else to determine your direction. And when you carry yourself like that, you rise above the emotional patterns that many men are used to. They expect drama, they expect reactions, they expect emotional begging. But when you detach with clarity, you disrupt every pattern that allowed him to be comfortable in his complacency. Your silence becomes powerful. Your distance becomes defining. Your choice becomes unforgettable. A woman who walks away shows a man what he failed to appreciate. It's easy to underestimate something you think will never leave. Familiarity makes people careless. They assume your patience is endless. They assume your loyalty is fixed. But the moment you walk away, you expose the illusion. You show him that your love had boundaries, your time had limits, and your energy had value. Suddenly, everything he dismissed becomes something he replays in his mind. He remembers your consistency, your kindness, your effort, but now he remembers it from a distance he did not expect. Walking away does not make you cold, it makes you clear. It sends a message that you will not stay where you are not valued, and that message hits deeper than any emotional outburst ever could. Because emotional chaos gives him an excuse to ignore the truth. Your calm exit forces him to face it. It forces him to question why you didn't feel safe, appreciated, or prioritized. It forces him to confront the reality that your absence is the result of his choices. And that ownership is uncomfortable. But discomfort is the birthplace of realization. When a woman walks away with dignity, she becomes unforgettable. Not because she is trying to be, but because she represents emotional maturity that is rare. She shows him what consequences look like. She shows him what standards feel like. She shows him that access to her is a privilege, not a right. And losing access creates a shift inside him that he cannot easily undo. He starts to perceive you differently, not as someone who clings, but as someone who chooses. Not as someone who tolerates, but as someone who evaluates. And that distinction changes everything. A man's perception of a woman's value is not shaped by her presence alone, it is shaped by her boundaries. And walking away is the ultimate boundary. It is the moment when you put your emotional well-being above your desire to be chosen. It is the moment when you say, I will not beg for love. It is the moment when you trust that the right person will meet you without you having to sacrifice your self-worth. That inner certainty increases the emotional weight you carry in his mind. Because a woman who values herself invites others to value her as well. There is a kind of power in a woman who knows she can leave. It doesn't make her dismissive, it makes her grounded. It makes her immune to manipulation. It makes her resistant to inconsistency. And men feel that energy deeply. When he realizes he cannot shake you with temporary withdrawal, emotional games, or half-hearted effort, he is forced to either rise to the level of your standards or lose you. That pressure is not created by fear, it is created by respect. Respect earned through your actions, not your words. Walking away is not about teaching him a lesson, it is about protecting your soul. And yet, in protecting yourself, you end up teaching him the very lesson he refused to learn earlier. He learns that access to you is earned. He learns that love requires effort. He learns that emotional maturity matters. And most importantly, he learns that your self-respect is stronger than your attachment to him. That realization rewires how he sees you because it highlights what makes you different from the women who stay in hopes of potential instead of respecting reality. A woman who walks away doesn't lose a man, she loses the version of him that wasn't ready. And whether he grows from that loss or fades from your life, your self-respect remains intact. That is why your decision holds power. That is why it transforms his perception. And that is why walking away is not the end of your worth. It is the beginning of others finally seeing it clearly. Your emotional control becomes the mirror that exposes his lack of maturity or effort. This isn't just a truth, it is a psychological shift that many men are completely unprepared for. Because emotional control is rare. It requires discipline, self-awareness, and a willingness to rise above the chaos that most people fall into. When you master your emotional responses, you change the entire dynamic between you. Suddenly, the usual tricks, excuses, or emotional games no longer work. Your calmness disrupts the environment he was comfortable in. And in that disruption, the truth he has been avoiding becomes impossible to hide. When you respond with composure, instead of chaos, he loses the shield he used to protect his own lack of effort. Many men rely on your emotional reactions to distract from their shortcomings. If you get upset, he can blame your tone instead of his behavior. If you cry, he can claim you are too emotional instead of acknowledging his carelessness. If you argue, he can accuse you of starting drama instead of addressing his lack of consistency. Emotional reactions give him an escape route, but emotional control gives him nowhere to run. When you stay composed, he is forced to see himself clearly. Your calm tone becomes the contrast that highlights his defensiveness, immaturity, or avoidance. Your steady energy reveals the instability in his. Your emotional discipline exposes the areas where he refuses to grow. It becomes impossible for him to pretend he is the reasonable one when your presence alone proves otherwise. This is why emotional control is powerful. It holds him accountable without you having to say a single dramatic word. Your calmness becomes the truth he cannot talk himself out of. It shows him that you are not operating from insecurity or desperation. You are operating from strength. That strength makes him uncomfortable because it takes away the power imbalance he relied on. When you stop reacting, he loses control. When you stop over-explaining, he loses excuses. When you stop chasing emotional closeness, he loses the comfort of your effort. Emotional discipline exposes the gap between who he thinks he is and how he actually behaves. A woman who controls her emotions becomes a mirror, and mirrors do not lie. If he is inconsistent, it shows. If he is careless, it shows. If he lacks initiative, it shows. If he is emotionally immature, It shows. And because you are not reacting, he can't blame you for the reflection he sees. That level of accountability is uncomfortable for any man who has been relying on your emotional sensitivity to compensate for his emotional laziness. Emotional control does not mean you are cold. It means you are grounded. You refuse to let someone else dictate your internal state. This lack of emotional volatility forces him to meet you on your level. If he wants to keep up with you, he must grow. He must communicate clearly. He must become consistent. He must learn emotional responsibility instead of projecting his fears or insecurities onto you. Your composure becomes the standard he must rise to, or he will lose you. When you stop responding emotionally, he loses the emotional advantage. He can no longer manipulate your reactions. He can no longer rely on you to initiate every difficult conversation. He can no longer use your tears as justification for shutting down. Instead, he is placed in a position where he must face his own lack of effort. The silence between your words becomes louder than any confrontation could ever be. That silence exposes truth. It exposes disconnect. It exposes whether he has the capacity to love you the way you deserve. Your emotional discipline becomes the emotional detox he didn't know he needed. It removes fantasy and reveals reality. It shows him how a mature woman handles pressure, disappointment, conflict, and boundaries. And it forces him to confront the difference between a woman who reacts impulsively and a woman who acts intentionally. Men fall for intention. Men respect restraint. Men are challenged by emotional strength. It pushes them into evolution or reveals they are not capable of it. Your emotional control is not just a skill, it is a filter. It filters out men who are intimidated by accountability. It filters out men who cannot match your emotional intelligence. It filters out men who only thrive when you are unstable. And it highlights the men who are ready for a woman who carries herself with dignity. Emotional maturity attracts emotional maturity, and emotional immaturity collapses under its pressure. When he sees that he cannot provoke you, shake you, or distract you from your standards, he realizes that he must either rise or fall behind. And that moment becomes the turning point, because he finally sees the truth. Your control was never about controlling him. It was about controlling you. And in doing so, you became someone he cannot manipulate, underestimate, or ignore. A woman who controls her emotions becomes unforgettable, not because she is distant, but because she is disciplined. Not because she is indifferent, but because she is intentional. Her strength exposes his weaknesses. Her certainty exposes his confusion. Her growth exposes his stagnation. And the man who truly wants her will be forced to confront the truth he avoided. In order to deserve a woman like her, he must become a man worthy of her peace. Detachment creates the space where his desire intensifies, because he must choose you without pressure. This is not just a principle, it is a force that transforms attraction at its deepest level. When a woman detaches, she removes the constant availability that a man often takes for granted. She steps back with calm conviction, no drama, no pleading, no emotional overexposure. In that space, he is no longer being guided by convenience or habit. He is forced to confront his true intentions. He must choose you without being pushed, without manipulation, without the safety net of your constant presence. And that choice awakens desire in a way that clinging never can. Detachment is not rejection. It is alignment. It is the act of honoring your own boundaries while creating the environment where his choices become meaningful. When a woman stops chasing, stops explaining herself, and stops over-investing, she forces clarity. A man sees the reality of her value, unclouded by expectation or pressure. He begins to understand that access to her attention, affection, and presence is no longer a given. And in realizing that, desire grows because choice has become intentional. He can no longer coast, he must engage, commit, and invest if he wants to be part of her world. The power of detachment lies in the removal of predictability. When you are always present, always responding, always available, a man can assume your energy will always be there. That assumption dulls desire. It creates complacency. But when you detach, you disrupt that pattern. You introduce absence, not as punishment, but as a natural consequence of self-respect. And in that absence, he begins to notice the details he ignored, to recognize the depth he overlooked, and to feel the longing that only space can create. Detachment is quiet, but it is not passive. It is active sovereignty over your own life. It communicates without words that your priorities, peace, and standards come first. And men are wired to respond to that strength, not because they are controlling, but because they are confronted with authenticity. When he sees that your presence is not dependent on his validation, he must examine himself. He must evaluate what he is willing to do to earn your attention. He must recognize that desire is not a given, it is earned. And when desire must be earned, it intensifies. A detached woman becomes magnetic because she operates from freedom, not fear. She is not reacting to his moods, his behaviors, or his indifference. She is living intentionally, pursuing her own purpose, and safeguarding her energy. And the effect on him is profound. In order to reconnect, he cannot rely on manipulation or casual interest. He must show up as a man who is willing to match her level of investment and integrity. The gap created by detachment is a mirror that reflects not only her value, but also his readiness to honor it. Detachment also removes emotional chaos from the equation. When you pull back, you stop fueling drama, insecurity, and pressure. You no longer react to inconsistencies, excuses, or neglect. And that absence of chaos forces him to deal with reality. He must confront his own intentions clearly, without distraction. That confrontation is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. Desire cannot grow in confusion or complacency. It only intensifies when the heart is challenged to choose with awareness. The space created by detachment is a proving ground. It tests his willingness to invest, to prioritize, and to act with purpose. It separates fleeting interest from genuine intention. He begins to realize that the woman who detached was never indifferent, she was discerning. She was teaching him the hardest lesson, that love, respect, and presence are never obligations, they are privileges. And if he wants to be part of her life, he must step into that reality consciously, not by accident. Detachment also heightens the emotional tension in a natural, irresistible way, because desire thrives in freedom, not in pressure. When he is not forced to respond, he begins to feel the pull of your energy in a raw, unmediated form. He notices the laughter he misses, the conversations he took for granted, the intimacy he assumed would always be available. That longing builds internally, intensifies, and becomes unavoidable. And the intensity is fueled by the realization that he must make a choice, actively, deliberately, consciously. When a woman detaches, she becomes the standard against which all other relationships are measured. He begins to evaluate his priorities, his effort, and his commitment. And he sees clearly that desire is no longer a casual feeling, it is a deliberate act of recognition. He must decide if he is willing to rise to her level, or if he will accept the consequences of his past inaction. The clarity detachment provides is a force that transforms casual attraction into focused, urgent, and sustained desire. Ultimately, detachment is the highest form of empowerment. It is a refusal to negotiate your worth, a refusal to chase validation, and a refusal to compromise your peace. And in doing so, it creates the exact conditions in which a man must choose you on his own terms with intention and clarity. That choice, born from freedom and absence, is the most powerful, the most magnetic, and the most irresistible form of desire. A woman who detaches does not weaken connection, she strengthens it. She turns attention into commitment, presence into reverence, and availability into a privilege he cannot ignore.